Hello, and welcome to A Dominican Way. My name is Mayme Puccio, and our guest today is Father Jim Warmke from the Episcopal Diocese of Newark.
Hello,
Welcome,
Mayme.
Father Jim. Well, we're discussing a topic today that makes me want to run, hide, and take cover. But Father Jim told me that we will get through this. We're going to deal today with issues of helping people who are close to the end of life, who are sick, who are dying, and for those who take care of them. So, Father Jim, maybe you can kind of jumpstart me into this with some either revelations or a personal experience you've gone through this week.
Well, this has been a difficult week for me. Any priest will tell you there are way too many funerals. I helped to bury the wife of my best friend, and she also was a long-time friend after a 2-month illness and struggle with cancer and finally time in hospice. But in a certain sense, Jesus himself gives us a template for how we are to deal with those in need. You'll recall in Luke's gospel the story of the widow of Mayme. Jesus comes to the town. He sees a funeral procession. He has compassion on the mother who's lost her only son. He stops the action. He intervenes and raises the young man, of course, from the dead. Well, you and I aren't going to raise anybody from the dead, but the template that he gives us is clear. We notice the suffering. We have compassion. We stop the action and intervene, and we do what we can. He did what he could because he was the living Son of God. But then we do what we can to care for those people who are ill, who are dying, and particularly also kind of in a second tier, there are those of us who are around the caretakers, the people who are the primary folks. And we need to help and support those who do the day-to-day care, whether it's the nurses and the doctors in the hospital, or the husband who sits and sleeps in the hospital night after night because his wife is struggling with every breath and with enormous pain. We need to help those who care for others so that they can have the strength by God's grace to do what they need to do, but also to remember that they have to care for themselves as well. That's a responsibility to their state in life. Every time someone says to me, Father, I'm just killing myself taking care of my Aunt Louise, I say suicide is a sin. You're not supposed to kill yourself taking care of your Aunt Louise. It's okay to spend yourself. It's okay to spend time and money with great generosity, but it's not okay to drive yourself into a nervous breakdown, to drive yourself into the hospital, to drive yourself into a place where nobody else in the world can stand to be around you. That's not okay. And I think one of the great examples we have of someone who was so gifted in this way is Mother Teresa of Calcutta. Okay, I don't think anybody in the 20th century worked harder in caring for those most in need, those who were in fact dying on the streets of India, and yet she was one of the most healthy people in the world psychologically and emotionally, because she didn't give up her life of prayer. She didn't give up the life of the community with the sisters. She didn't give up the other things that she had to do so that she could continue to be the channel of grace that God called her to be.
That's so insightful, Father Jim. So basically what I'm hearing you say is that it's a community effort, or should be a community effort. And there's so many components involved with it also. The physical practicality of the daily maintenance and the medical procedures, and even more importantly, I guess it's paramount with the medical procedures, is maintaining the dignity of those last times for people, which is so overlooked much of the time because people become so incapacitated that dignity kind of flies by the slabs in the terms of...
It's hard to be dignified in a hospital gown.
Yeah.
It's hard to be dignified if somebody you don't know is changing your diaper. A lot of people worry, they want to do the right thing. And that's good, except they get themselves jammed up, I think. Show me your right hand, please. Just show me your right hand. Good. Now show me your wrong hand. You don't have one, do you? the opposite of right isn't always wrong. Sometimes the opposite of right is just what's left. And so when people say, I want to do the right thing, I need to do the right thing, I say, no. Pray for the grace. Use your brain, but pray for the grace to figure out to do what's called for, what's adequate, what's useful, okay? Because sometimes there isn't a right thing. My father is dying, should I stay in the hospital room overnight or should I go home? Well, there's no right thing. There's just what you choose. There's what you decide to do in the light of God's grace.
That's so helpful because there's no manual per se. Each person, each individual, each situation is so unique with commonality running through it, but depending on the nature of the disease or the death process. But yeah, that's very helpful to hear that, Father Jim. And I think also too, again, the heavy emphasis on the caretakers, especially people, it's easy for people who have not been giving throughout their lives or have been, had more of an unselfish bent to them, selfish bent. The unselfish will give and give and give until they drop.
Well, that's right. And one needs to take care with that sort of thing. There are some situations in which, that's what's called for. That would be the grace-filled thing to do. But in most situations, again, driving yourself till you drop, unless it does some clear, important service for the other people, you need to be careful. I counseled a man recently who had been spending night after night in the hospital with his wife because she was in so much pain. She'd wake up in pain and she'd have one of the little pain pumps in her hand and she'd forget that it was there. Or she didn't have the strength to press it. Or she'd need something for the nurse but couldn't find or press the call button. So he stayed night after night after night after night to make sure she got the care she needed. That was a grace-filled thing. Then she went into hospice, where things were calmer, clearer. There was a much higher percentage of attentiveness to the nurses because they had fewer patients. They weren't trying to cure her. They were trying to make her comfortable. And I counseled him, you know what? Stay overnight if it means something for you, but you're not going to improve her quality of care here. It's better for you and for her that you get a good night's sleep to the degree that you can.
Such wise counsel.
Do you see but can you see the difference between the two?
Yeah. It's almost, I think, all of us or people in this situation get patterned into the daily routine so much so that there is no, unless someone comes and picks up the phonograph needle and puts it into the next room, we don't know how to go to the next level.
Well, that's right. And see, one of the, Christianity is my favorite religion. Okay, I wouldn't belong to any other one. But one of the difficulties in belonging to a faith where a crucified Savior is the primary icon is that we can begin to think that unless we're bleeding, we're doing something wrong. If we're not bleeding, we're doing something wrong. And that's not always true. That the godly thing to do, the grace-filled thing to do, is to find ways to provide the best care we can for the person who is ill or infirmed, the most reasonable care we can in terms of finances and emotional things, but then also to make sure that, as I said, it's okay to spend ourselves, but it's not okay to hurt ourselves. That's not a grace-filled activity. You know what I mean? Either physically or also sometimes emotionally. Sometimes, again, I was working with this family, they had an only son. He's a wonderful young man at the age of 30, and it was tearing him apart to see his mother in pain in the hospital, not being herself, in terrible agony. And I counseled him. He said, what should I do? I said, you need to visit your mother every day, right?